are becoming more and more ready for deployment worldwide. And so here we also spend quite a bit of time trying to understand what is, we phrase it, the value proposition for these advanced nuclear technologies. And what we mean by that is, what do they bring to the table that light water reactors cannot already supply? If you're in the business of electricity, maybe a light water reactor is okay. If you're interested in high temperature heat for industrial processes, then you need a different technology. If you want to close the fuel cycle, you need a different technology and so on. And then lastly, very, very important question, what is the appropriate role for the government in the development and demonstration of new nuclear technologies? One way to look at the study, one of many ways to look at the study, is that there is a piece sort of for industry. Industry has to pull its act together, bring down the cost, start to deliver new plants on time and on schedule. But there is also a piece for the government. Without a change in energy policies that bring all low carbon or carbon free or clean energy technologies on an equal level, it's going to be hard to see how nuclear is going to thrive and okay? So these are the questions. And now we have structured this presentation into 3 sessions, if you wish. The first is going to be me. Well, you have to bear with me for a few more minutes. And I'm going to cover the first question, the decarbonization targets, and how nuclear can play a role there. Then we're going to have Dr. Petty come to the podium, and he will discuss the next 2 bullets there. So what is the cost of nuclear, how to reduce it, and what is the role of advanced reactors. And finally, we'll have Dr. Parsons, who's going to talk about the role of the government in aiding the development and demonstration of new nuclear technologies. Does that sound like an interesting plan? Yes? Please.
I find it strange that there is no specific question about safety issues and nuclear waste. I guess it is in the cost, maybe? Or?
No, it's not in the cost. We can address that. I would prefer to do it at the end if you don't mind. But clearly, we address safety mostly in the context of the new technologies. What do they bring to the table in terms of safety? Do they have a safety profile? The report is not particularly, in fact, is not focused at all on either waste and proliferation, which are the other 2 challenges traditionally brought up about nuclear. You may wonder, why didn't we focus on those? Maybe I can say a few words now. Yes. It's not because they're not important. We recognize that they're very important. But I would say that the political dimension of both waste and proliferation far outweighs its technical and economic dimension. In other words, to put it clearly, there are technical solutions, particularly for waste. There are very robust technical solutions, whether it is interim storage or shallow excavated disposal or even deep boreholes. And governments have before then these technical solutions. We think that they have to act on them. And what has caused challenges and problems in the past was not that the technical solutions were not available or were not sound, they were not feasible. It's mostly that the selection of site, for example, for disposal, has not been consensus-based. Has been government saying, we want to put a site here or there. So what we advocate in the report, but it's a very, very small section, is that the government takes approaches that are consensus-based with a lot of engagement in local communities. And there are at least a couple of examples in Europe suggesting that this approach can work if you think about Finland and if you think about Sweden. But we reviewed, I should just close my remark on this by saying that we reviewed recent studies on the nuclear fuel cycle. Because if you think about waste, if you think about proliferation, those are issues related to the fuel cycle. We reviewed studies conducted at MIT, the Department of Energy, and other organizations. And we found that we didn't have anything new to say. Okay, so people have reviewed the technical solutions. They've identified that the challenges are mostly of political nature. We agree. I hope that answers that, at least for now. If you want to go deeper, we can do it. Any other questions before we move into the meat of the report or the findings? Okay. So we've organized the study according to these 5 major themes. This was just mostly organizational. So let me take a step back and start with what we call the big picture. Many of you have already seen this plot. I hope you can see it also from the back. what is shown here is the so-called Human Development Index. That's sort of an aggregate measure of a number of aspects of human life, if you wish. You have health, education, living standards. You put it all together, you get a Human Development Index. And then on the x-axis, we have the electricity use per capita. So this is now a kilowatt hour per person. And you can see that there is a fairly strong correlation between the access to electricity and the Human Development Index. Each of these dots is a country. So, for example, if we take Norway, Iceland, the United States, I should have picked France, but I don't know where it is, that. Anything below 0.7, 0.8 is considered still underdeveloped. Okay, so there is a legitimate aspiration for the world population to elevate their standards of living to a Human Development Index, if you want to use that measure, above 0.8. So the International Energy Agency projects that due to this sort of desire to increase standards of living, the world's electricity consumption, just electricity, is going to increase by about 45% by 2040. Okay, so within the next 20 years, we may see a fairly large increase in electricity consumption. This is mostly driven by access of people to electricity in non-OECD countries, so in developing countries. China, I guess, India, a lot of Africa, Southeast Asia, etc. In the West, or in OECD countries, Japan and the West, the growth is predicted, but it's of course not driven by access of new people coming to the market. It's mostly driven by the electrification of the transportation sector or other sectors such as manufacturing in those countries. Okay? By the way, you may think that this is vastly in non-OECD, but I should have the figure there. It's actually about 60-40. In other words, let's say 2/3 is predicted in non-OECD and about 1/3 in OECD countries. So, bottom line, there is a need for a lot more electricity worldwide in the coming years. What is the challenge? You want to produce more electricity, but of course the dilemma is how to exponentially this energy generation while limiting global warming. If you now look at the full energy picture, this is not just electricity, this is everything included. Electricity, transportation, manufacturing, heating, the homes and so on. And you can see over the years that the generation mix actually has not changed much. You have over 80% is coming from fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, and oil. And less than 20%, in fact, really less than 20%, is coming from low carbon energy sources. And within that category, you have essentially three subcategories. The first is nuclear in yellow, about 5% of the total. Then you have hydroelectric in blue. And then you have renewable energies, which in this context really means wind and solar, a little bit of geothermal, that makes sense. I like this picture because it's properly dramatic. So when you hear people say, we're going to do everything with, for example, nuclear, or we're going to do everything with solar and wind, they're telling you really that over the next couple of decades, these little slivers, which you can hardly see on this plot, are going to become the whole picture. So it really sort of brings home, I think, the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing. If you want to decarbonize the economy, not just the power sector, this is what you have to displace. Enormous. Right? It's not going to be easy. So I'm going to introduce here a theme that, again, you'll hear over and over again. Do you think it makes sense to just focus on one low-carbon energy technology if you have a magnitude of that scale? I don't think so. You want to have as many options as possible. You're going to need them all. You're going to need wind, solar, hydro. You're going to need nuclear. You're also going to need, frankly, fossil fuels with carbon capture and sequestration if it becomes available at scale, cost, and there are facilities or underground reservoirs that make sense. You're going to need all of them. Okay, that's really the point. All right, so with that cap, let me jump into the first question. So, should nuclear play a role, and what role is that going to be in decarbonizing the power sector? I'm going to give you two arguments. We found two arguments that are compelling. The first, I'm going to call it a scalability argument. I've just shown you the magnitude of the challenge, how big it is, and how fast we have to go. We have between now and 2050. Let me tell you about this plot here. What I'm showing is, again, grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. This is just the power sector, electricity, now worldwide. Okay? So grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour is the carbon intensity of the power sector. You see that over the past 20, 30 years, it has been more or less constant at around and above 500 grams of kilowatt hour, 500 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. You remember where France was from the first slide? Where was it? 50 or 60? So this is worldwide. What's the target? Where do we need to go? We need to go from here to down here. COP21, Paris Agreement. Okay, when 3 years ago the countries or the nations got together, they said we need to drive down the carbon emissions in the power sector from up here to down here. This is what people refer to as the 2-degree scenario, because it means that if you were able to reach that level of decarbonization, hopefully the average surface temperature of the Earth will not rise above 2 degrees, by more than 2 degrees above the pre-industrial revolution level. Okay, so how do I go from here to here? If you don't do anything, if you don't sort of increase your low carbon capacity, the emissions in the power sector are going to creep up with time. If you use the so-called Energiewende, which is the German energy transition policy, their policy, they're shutting down nuclear power plants and they're bringing online solar and wind. With that comes backup, which in their case is coal, but it could be natural gas. And you scale that globally, and the figure that we use to scale is the GDP, the gross domestic product. If you scale it globally, you're going to follow this curve. And you're not going to get even close to decarbonizing the power sector by 2050. If on the other end, the world built new nuclear capacity at the rate at which France and Sweden built their nuclear fleet, again, properly scaled by GDP worldwide, we would be able to decarbonize the power sector between now and 2050. Now, the words here are chosen carefully. We call this nuclear buildup historically feasible rate. These are rates that we have seen in Sweden and France, and to a lesser extent also in the United States, back in the 70s, the 80s, and 90s. Whether those rates can be replicated now is a different question. Does the industry have enough muscle to build up massively the way it did back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s? We don't know. We think it may. The other thing is regulations. Current regulations allow you to ramp up that quickly. We don't know, but at least we have a fighting chance. That's the point. Yes, sir. Enough uranium, more than enough. This is not a technology that is limited by uranium. Even with current reserves, you have fuel for hundreds of years. If you start extracting from tails, there is much more. If you start extracting from seawater, it costs a little bit more. But remember, the impact of fuel costs on the cost of electricity, of nuclear electricity, is very small. So the short answer is you're not going to run out. So I don't think that's the problem. Yes?
How to make the extrapolation
The extrapolation is done the exact same way for all three approaches, and so we scale it by the gross domestic product, right? Not by population.
to scale the results of those years, to scale the results of objectives?
No, we scale the results of what we have already seen in Germany over the past 10 years. In fact, this is a great lead into the next slide, because this is input that goes into the previous slide. Okay, so these are average added kilowatt hour per capita per year. So this is new electricity, energy generated. It's not just installed capacity, it's energy generated per capita per year added. And we compare the best decade for nuclear in Sweden, France, of course you have to go back 10, 20 years, in the US. For natural gas, the best or the largest build out of natural gas that we've seen, I think, worldwide was the 2000s in the United States, actually. Coal for China is more recent, but they're still building a lot of coal power plants. And then the best decades for solar and wind in Spain, Germany, and Denmark. And what this shows is, again, this is historical, is that nuclear can be scaled up or brought online at least as fast as coal and natural gas, and according to historical data, faster than solar. Okay, so this is input that goes into this. Once again, let me be clear. We're not here to tell you, forget about solar and wind. We're here to tell you need more. So, and if you want to be successful, nuclear better be part of the mix. So that's what I call the scalability argument. The second argument is of economic nature. First, let me read the statement, then I'll tell you about these plots and the analysis that goes behind. What we found in our study is that excluding nuclear energy from a decarbonized mix or a decarbonized scenario in the power sector drives up the average cost of electricity. Right? So if you're just trying to do everything and exclude nuclear, your average cost of electricity goes up. So what does the analysis entail? Again, please don't look at the plots yet because they are unintelligible unless I tell you what's behind. So we have been developing at MIT over the past 3 years a tool. It's called GenX. It's a decision-making tool for power markets. Okay, it's at this point has been verified and validated, so we're pretty confident that the results of this tool are robust. What does the tool do? It first takes the hourly electricity demand, how much electricity is required in a particular region of the world. This could be the UK, it could be France, it could be the northeast of the United States, it could be Texas. I'm going to show some results here from Texas. It could be a region in China. We've done actually 6 regions, 2 in Europe, 2 in China, and 2 in the United States. And so the first is the hourly electricity demand. That entails 8,700 plus entries. So there is 1 entry every hour. Okay. Similarly, we need the hourly weather patterns for that market, 8,700 plus entries as well. That's important because, of course, how much sunshine you get and how much wind you get drives the capacity factors for solar and wind power generators. Okay, and so we use historical data for representative year in these different markets. We also need for all power generators on the grid their capital, operation and maintenance, and fuel cost for all of them, whether they're wind, solar, nuclear, natural gas. You need to know what it costs to build and then to operate, including backup and storage, because if you have the variable renewables, you're going to get, of course, intermittency in the generation, and so you need to have backup and storage, or backup and or storage to smooth or to fill the hole, so to speak. And lastly, ramp-up rates, which refers to the ability of a power generator to come online or to change its power to load fall, to follow the load on the. So the code, the tool pulls all this input together, and it basically outputs or provides the optimal generation mix. Okay, the generation mix that gives you the minimum, optimal in this case refers to minimum, average cost of electricity in that market. So the figure of merit that we're going to look at is dollars per megawatt hour. Right? That's the average cost of electricity in that particular power market over the course of 1 year. Right? And we can run the code, or we can do that calculation for different scenarios. So here there are 3 scenarios: blue, orange, and gray. Blue is a scenario in which nuclear is not allowed to play. You cannot select nuclear as part of the generation mix. The second scenario is orange, and it's nuclear at a nominal cost. What we mean by nominal cost is we have an assumption on the nominal cost of the overnight capital cost of nuclear. This figure is market dependent. So we pick one number for the US, but we pick a different number for France, a different number for the UK, a different number for China. Because if you look at the evidence, different countries have managed to build nuclear power plants at different costs. Okay? And the third is nuclear at lower cost. So we have artificially reduced the overnight capital cost of nuclear by 20% or 25%. And we have rerun the scenario. And then we can run these scenarios as a function of what we call the decarbonization target. So the last variable that you have to pay attention on this plot is the x-axis, which is CO2 emissions. It's once again grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. Okay? So the world is currently 500, remember? And we need to go down to between 50 and 10. Right? So now we can look at the plots. The first plot here is for Texas. These two plots refer to our two extreme ends of the range, okay? The first is Texas. Texas is very, very favorable to wind and solar. They got a lot of sunshine, a lot of wind. And it's actually also very cheap natural gas. So this is the worst case for nuclear, if you wish. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the most favorable case for nuclear that we've seen so far, is one in which renewables are not particularly good. This is a northern region in China, so they don't get a lot of sunshine, they don't get a lot of wind. This is one of the most populous regions in the world. It's around Beijing. It's something like 100 million people. And their fossil fuels, in particular natural gas, is pretty expensive. Okay, so these are sort of the two polar extremes. So let's look at Texas. You can see that in Texas, even as you drive down the maximum allowable CO2 emissions, the difference between nuclear and non-nuclear is pretty small. You really have to go to an extremely decarbonized scenario, one, that's really, really extreme, before you see a scenario without nuclear having a significantly higher cost. But that's Texas. A lot of the world doesn't look like Texas. A lot of the world looks like this. China is a completely different story in a way. The trends are similar qualitatively, but quantitatively very, very different. In China, even at a modest decarbonization target, 100, you see that the blue scenario, which has no nuclear, compared to the nominal nuclear, is about 30–40% higher. And as you drive down your decarbonization target, the difference between a scenario excluding nuclear and a scenario with nuclear becomes enormous. Now, at 50, non-nuclear is twice as expensive as nuclear. At 10, it's almost 3 times, and at 1, it goes off the chart. Okay. So why is that? Why do scenarios without nuclear tend to cost? Good guesses. If you exclude nuclear, where are you left? Solar, wind, natural gas, but if you decarbonize, you cannot use natural gas because it has the emissions. So it's solar and wind. Yeah, I think they can hear me. It's solar and wind, and then what comes with it? Storage. I'm going to show you in the next slide what happens to the generation mix. If you exclude nuclear, you end up building out an enormous amount of solar and wind, but with it comes the storage. And that's what really adds to the cost. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, okay, I know storage is expensive now, but what about in 30 years? So I should tell you that these calculations are very, very conservative. In other words, we've made conservative assumptions on the cost of nuclear, expensive, and we've made conservative assumptions on the cost of renewables and storage, cheap. Not where they are now, but we have sort of projected using the National Renewable Energy Laboratory estimates what renewables and storage will cost, say, 20 years from now. Of course, these are predictions. Nobody knows what they will really cost, okay? But we're being very generous. I think the assumption is that for storage is less than half what it is now, 2.5 times lower. So.
And what type of storage?
It's batteries. It's not heat. It's batteries.
So huge volume type of.
Absolutely enormous. Yes. Yes, sir.
And what about interconnections? Because Beijing at the moment has no coal, virtually is moving to gas. Building renewables is difficult, so I think a lot will hinge on how interconnections are treated.
Yeah, it's a good comment. In our model is what we call the copper plate model, which means electricity flows freely within that region. So we don't have constraints due to transmission. It could be added with additional.
What about towards the west of the country?
Say it again.
What about within towards the rest of the country? I mean, not just the Beijing region, but the rest of China.
We look at 2 regions in China. One is Beijing, the other one is Zhejiang province, which is another very populous province, but down south, not south, central, near Shanghai, essentially. Yeah. No, we haven't looked at the west because there is not a lot of population here. Yes. Yes. The comment is for renewables, if you are to sustain a massive build out of renewables, you need to account for the fact that they consume land a lot more than nuclear. It's in the report. In other words, for any scenario that has a massive build out of renewables, we simply note in the report the amount of land that would be required. But we don't comment on whether, that's available, feasible.